as you say, it had no shadow. There was no shadow he was casting on the wall.
Yeah.
And they didn't show his feet, which I think for a photograph image you would might find it a bit difficult. I agree that Booth's picture of Hasib does look rather dodgy. I'm not at all convinced that he was in London.
Yeah, I don't think there's no evidence of these guys actually being in London as such. There's no proper evidence when you scrutinise it of them being in London, and if the evidence doesn't say that, we've got to wonder where they were, because as I say, travelling across London, you would get picked up somewhere. That's the point.
Yeah. But there are some stories about, so for example, there's the ripple effect has the 4 in London, and Daniel Obercheek, who claims he was here, he believes Hasib Hussein was somehow in London apparently, although he doesn't think he was on the bus. Yeah, no, so well,
this is the problem, is they'll try and use any kind of technique to get people to believe something. It's a bit like these videos we've seen supposedly of Mohammed Sadiq Khan actually saying that he's involved in jihad and so on. Now when you say that to people, they say, oh, what about those videos? Well, those videos don't actually prove any involvement in 7/7. And we know in this day and age that digital images and voices and so on can be very easily reproduced like that.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, they will try and use that in people's minds to convince them of what happened on 7/7. But actually, it's a proof of nothing other than the fact that they might have had, at their very best, from the other side's point of view, that they may have had some, you know, anti-British views or whatever.
Yeah. Well, there was an ethos in Beeston of going to some sort of training camps in Pakistan to learn to fight, and I think it was to do with the independence of Kashmir. And they would collect funding for this. It's important to appreciate this was a shared collective ethos in Beeston, that it was okay, a bit like young lads here would join the territorials for a year or two, that it was ethically okay, and that okay in Muslim and Islamic terms, and that wasn't anything to do with terrorism. That would be their view.
And I think what we've got to understand as well is the massive difference of psychology between the true suicide bomber we see in places like Palestine and other occupied territories, who is somebody who's totally desperate, has nothing to live for, and therefore perhaps can be persuaded to take their own life.
Right.
Now, the 19 so-called hijackers on 9/11 and the 4 suicide bombers so-called on 7/7 do not fit those profiles at all.
Absolutely not.
So even if they were over in Pakistan and they were involved in resistance out there, all rules of law on the planet say you're entitled to use force to remove people in your lands, basically. That is a principle of international law. So to be involved in that is nowhere near the same thing as to be involved in suicide bombing, which is indiscriminate in terms of who it kills. These kind of resistance fighters are very keen on not targeting civilians,
not only
and just targeting people in the security forces of the countries who are occupying.
And not only indiscriminate, but totally pointless. If he'd had a bomb, he could probably well have left it under the seat and got off just before. A lot of people got off when the bus stopped at the bottom of Woburn Square, Woburn Place, when it first turned in. So there was no need for these alleged suicide bombers to get themselves blown up by being next to the rucksack when it went off.
Again, if you follow the logic of this, these are highly trained operatives and everything else. You don't want to be losing your best men in the attack. You want them for the next attack. You don't have to train everybody else to do it. So again, it just doesn't make any sense. And one of the things I find particularly interesting is the fact that they're supposed to target the Edgware Road, which anybody knows about London has an extremely high Muslim population.
Totally. Well, so does Aldgate. Two of the stops blown up are distinguished by very high Muslim populations. So if it was some sort of more Zionist-inspired attack, you can see why they might choose those areas. Certainly no Muslim would choose it.
Exactly. If you follow the logic through, these are suicide bombers who believe in Allah and believe they're going to go to heaven and so on. They're going to believe their chances of getting into heaven are going to be that much worse if they've taken Muslim lives in the process, if they can avoid doing that. I mean, obviously, Nick has done a lot of research into this. I've done some research myself. I've brought some expertise from being a former counter-terrorist officer. And it's absolutely clear that there is no evidence to implicate 4 Muslims in these attacks. Now, if you're saying they were responsible without evidence, that is bigotry, basically. And this has been the position adopted by mainstream and alternative left-wing movements, including Stop the War. So my message to those left-wingers is you are racists, bigots and fascists unless you can bring us the evidence of these 4 guys being involved, basically. And that is a real throwing down, a real challenge. We've heard so many things about, Islamofascism and so on, but to me the worst fascism and bigotry a lot is coming from left-wing activists who really should know better.
And you know why they're doing it? Because if they didn't at all, they would have to think. Their meetings would actually have to discuss issues, and this would really hurt. The Stop the War movement likes to define itself by what it's against. We're against the war, we'll go out and demonstrate, we'll go out and march, and don't have to think about anything. And the consensus of accepting the government view means that there's no struggle with thought and evidence and so on. They can just brush that away, and it all gets brushed away with a simple, single phrase, "Oh, I'm not a conspiracy theorist."
Yeah. But
that is always trotted out, and it means, go away, I don't want to think about it. And to Muslims, it means shut up and take the blame.
Yeah, and Jesus in the Bible very clearly says, know thine enemy.